The scent of blood, her own painted crimson trails through the midnight forest as Seraphina stumbled between ancient oaks, their twisted branches clawing at her torn dress like skeletal fingers. Every breath burned. Every step sent lightning through her ribs where the council's enforcers had struck her down, declaring her an abomination before the entire pack. Run faster. The voice in her head wasn't her own. It never was. It belonged to something wild and ancient that lived beneath her skin, something that made her different, something that made her dangerous. Behind her, the howls grew closer, hunting howls, the kind that meant they weren't bringing her back alive. Snow began to fall, each flake kissing her fevered skin like tiny accusations. The winter storm matched the chaos in her heart. Cold, merciless, suffocating. She'd grown up believing she was just another wolf in the Silver Moon pack, another face in the crowd, until 3 nights ago when everything changed, when it awakened. Her hand pressed against the oak's rough bark as she caught her breath, and immediately the tree shuddered. Silver light pulsed from her palm, racing up through the trunk like liquid starlight, and for a heartbeat, the entire forest seemed to hold its breath. The ancient magic recognized her, called to her, whispered secrets her human mind couldn't fully grasp. You are more than they know, more than they fear. Stop, she whispered, yanking her hand away from the bark. But it was too late. The silver glow had already marked her location like a beacon. A howl pierced the night closer, now maybe half a mile. Alpha Marcus himself was leading the hunt. The man who'd raised her after her parents died, the man who'd looked at her with such disgust when the power first manifested, his lip curling as if she'd become something foul. Seraphina carries cursed blood, he'd announced to the council, his voice echoing through the great hall. The old magic, the kind that destroyed the first pack centuries ago. She tried to explain that she couldn't control it, that she didn't understand what was happening to her. But fear makes people cruel, and the council's verdict had been swift, exile or execution. She'd chosen to run, now stumbling through the snow with her heart hammering against her ribs. She wondered if she'd simply delayed the inevitable. The power thrummed beneath her skin like a caged wildfire, begging to be released. It whispered promises of revenge, of showing them exactly what they should fear. But that was the problem, wasn't it? She was starting to want to listen. A branch snapped somewhere in the darkness behind her. Close, too close. Seraphina forced her exhausted legs to move, pushing deeper into the forbidden woods, territory that belonged to neither pack nor human. Stories said ancient things dwelt here, older than the moon itself, things that even alphas feared to face. Her bare feet slipped on the icy ground, sending her sprawling into a drift of snow. The cold bit through her thin dress, and for a moment she couldn't breathe around the agony in her chest. Everything hurt, her body, her heart, her soul. Get up, the voice commanded. You are not prey. I don't know what I am, she gasped into the snow. You are awakening. The hunting howls split the night again, and this time she could hear the voices underneath, Marcus calling her name, his beta Jerome promising a quick death if she surrendered. They spoke of her like she was already lost, already gone, like the girl they'd known had died the moment silver light first blazed from her fingertips. Maybe she had. Seraphina dragged herself upright, ice crystals clinging to her dark hair like a crown. In the distance, she could see lights, not the warm glow of pack fires, but something else, something that made her pulse quicken with recognition she couldn't name. The power inside her stirred, restless and hungry. She looked back once at the forest that had been her home, at the territory where she'd played as a child, and dreamed of finding her mate and living a normal life. All of that was ash now. All of that had burned the moment she'd become whatever she was becoming. Fine, she whispered to the wind, to the voice in her head, to the silver light that pulsed just beneath her skin. If I'm not their pack anymore, then I'll find out what I really am. The howls were getting closer, but for the first time since this nightmare began, Seraphina wasn't running toward escape. She was running toward answers, and something deep in the forbidden woods was calling her name. But wait, Before we dive deeper into Seraphina's journey, I need to ask you something. Are you ready to discover the truth about her power? About the ancient bloodline flowing through her veins? Then hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for Clarissa Romance Collections, because this story is just getting started. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when she discovers she's not just any wolf. She's the key to a prophecy that will shake the very foundations of the supernatural world. Now let's see who's been watching her from the shadows. Chapter 2. The scent hit her first: wild pine and midnight storms, something primal that made every instinct she possessed go utterly still. Not the familiar musk of her pack, but something older, deeper, something that spoke to the silver fire in her veins and made it purr with recognition. Seraphina froze between two towering pines, her breath misting in the frozen air. The hunting howls had gone silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, as if the entire forest was waiting for something momentous to unfold. Seraphina Nightshade. The voice rolled through the darkness like distant thunder, rich and commanding in ways that made her knees want to buckle. She spun toward the sound, silver light already sparking along her fingertips in response to the threat. Or was it anticipation? He stepped from the shadows like he'd been carved from them, and every rational thought in her head scattered like startled ravens. He was massive, not just tall, but built with the kind of raw power that made mountains seem fragile. Dark hair fell across sharp features that looked like they'd been chiseled from marble by some ancient god with a cruel sense of beauty. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart cold. Golden amber like molten metal, and when they fixed on her face, she felt stripped bare, seen, known in ways that terrified and thrilled her. "You know my name." Her voice came out steadier than she felt, though the silver light dancing around her hands betrayed her composure. His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I know many things about you, little wolf, including the fact that you're bleeding out in my territory." His territory? The Forbidden Woods belonged to no pack, no alpha. Everyone knew that. But the way he stood, the casual dominance radiating from every line of his body, said otherwise. "I don't know who you think you are," she began, then gasped as he moved. One moment he was 20 feet away. The next, he was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could see the gold flecks in those impossible eyes. He moved like liquid shadow, like something that had never learned the meaning of fear. "I think," he said softly, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through her bones, "that I am the Lycan King, and you, Seraphina Nightshade, are dying on my doorstep." The Lycan King, the myth, the legend whispered around pack fires, stories of the first alpha, the one who ruled before the pack scattered, before the old magic was forgotten, stories parents told to frighten children into obedience. But he wasn't a story, he was real, and he was looking at her like she was a puzzle he intended to solve. "You're supposed to be dead," she whispered. "So are you, according to the hunting party I just discouraged." His gaze dropped to her torn dress, to the blood staining the fabric, and something dangerous flickered in those golden depths. "They won't be following you anymore." The casual way he said it, like he'd just mentioned the weather, sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "You didn't kill them?" "No, though I considered it." He tilted his head, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel like prey. "Tell me, little wolf, why does your pack want you dead?" The question hit like a physical blow. The betrayal, the fear in Alpha Marcus's eyes, the council's swift judgment. It all came rushing back, and the silver light around her hands flared brighter. "Because I'm an abomination," she said, the word tasting like poison. "Because I carry cursed blood." He laughed, and the sound was rich and dark, like expensive wine. Cursed blood. He stepped closer, and she caught that scent again, wild and untamed and utterly male. "Is that what they told you?" "It's what I am." The admission hurt, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "The old magic, the kind that destroys everything it touches. The kind that built kingdoms." He corrected, his voice soft but carrying absolute authority. "The kind that crowned the first Lycan kings and queens. The kind that flows through bloodlines so ancient most wolves have forgotten they ever existed." Her heart stuttered. "That's impossible." "Is it He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers traced the air just above her palm, following the silver light that danced there. The power responded to his proximity, growing brighter, more controlled. Tell me, Serafina, what do you feel when you look at me? Recognition, hunger, a pull so deep it felt carved into her soul, but she couldn't say that, couldn't admit that every instinct in her body was screaming at her to trust this impossible man, this myth made flesh. I feel, she started, then stopped, overwhelmed by the intensity in his gaze. You feel the call of your true bloodline, he finished for her. You feel what your ancestors felt when they stood beside the first kings, when they were more than pack wolves scratching in the dirt for territory. Behind them, a new sound rose in the distance, different howls, deeper, more primal, the kind that made even alphas look over their shoulders. His expression hardened. We need to move. There are things in these woods far more dangerous than your former packmates, and they're drawn to power like yours. He extended his hand. The question is, do you trust me enough to live? She stared at his outstretched palm, at the choice that would change everything. Behind her lay exile and certain death. Before her stood a legend, offering answers wrapped in dangerous promises. The silver light pulsed, reaching toward him like it recognized something she couldn't yet name. I don't even know your name, she whispered. His smile was sharp as winter moonlight. Call me Darius, and if you're very brave, little wolf, I'll show you exactly what your cursed blood is truly capable of. Chapter 3. She took his hand. The moment their skin connected, the world exploded into silver fire, not painful, transcendent, like coming home to a place she'd never been but had dreamed of her entire life. The power that had been clawing at her insides for days suddenly stilled, purring with contentment as if it had found its match. Darius's eyes widened slightly, the only sign that he'd felt it too, that electric recognition, that soul-deep knowing that neither of them could explain. Interesting, he murmured, his fingers tightening around hers as he drew her deeper into the woods, away from the approaching howls. Very interesting indeed. But as they moved through the shadows, Serafina's mind drifted backward, pulled into memories she tried so hard to bury. The past 3 days felt like a lifetime, but the pain was still razor sharp. She'd been in the training circle when it first happened, sparring with Jerome's son, Marcus Jr., a cocky boy who'd always resented that she could hold her own against the male wolves. He'd gotten rough, more vicious than necessary, and something inside her had snapped. Silver flame had erupted from her hands without warning, sending him flying across the circle. The scent of singed fur filled the air as he hit the ground, shifted and whimpering. Everyone had gone silent, not just quiet, but the kind of absolute stillness that comes before a storm. Alpha Marcus had arrived within minutes, his face pale as death when he saw the silver scorch marks on the ground, the way the very air seemed to shimmer with residual power. Impossible, he'd whispered, and she'd never heard him sound so afraid. The silver flame has been extinct for 3 centuries. You're thinking about when it first manifested, Darius said quietly, his voice cutting through her memories like a blade. They'd stopped beside a frozen stream, moonlight turning the ice to sheets of mercury, the silver flame. She jerked her hand from his, wrapping her arms around herself. How could you possibly... Because I've seen it before. His golden eyes held ancient sorrow, long ago when the world was different, when wolves like you ruled alongside wolves like me. The memories wouldn't stop coming now, flooding back with brutal clarity. The council meeting, Alpha Marcus refusing to meet her eyes as he spoke to the assembled elders. The historical records are clear. The silver flame bloodline was eliminated during the Great Purge for a reason. It's unstable, destructive. One moment of lost control could level our entire territory. Elder Sophia, her weathered face grim, the last silver wolf nearly destroyed 3 packs before she was stopped. The magic corrupts them, makes them believe they're above natural law. And then Marcus, the man who taught her to ride a bike and bandaged her scraped knees, delivering the killing blow. I should have seen the signs earlier. Her parents died in a fire, didn't they? What if it wasn't an accident? What if the power was already there even as a child? They think I killed my own parents, she whispered, the words tearing from her throat like splinters of glass. The pack that raised me, that I would have died for, they think I'm a monster. Darius moved closer, his presence solid and warm in the frozen night. What do you think? The question was gentle, but it hit harder than any accusation. She'd been asking herself the same thing for 3 days, remembering that night 17 years ago. The fire that had consumed their cottage, the way she'd been found in the garden, completely unharmed while her parents burned inside. She'd been 5 years old, too young to control any power, too young to even remember clearly. But lately, in her dreams, she could swear she remembered silver light dancing on her fingertips as the flames rose higher. I don't know, she admitted, her voice breaking. I don't remember enough to know, but Marcus raised me after they died. He was like a father to me, and when he looked at me in that council chamber, she swallowed hard. He looked at me like I was already dead to him. Like everything we'd shared was a lie. Fear makes cowards of even good men, Darius said, and there was bitter experience in his voice. I've seen alphas I respected turn on their own blood when they discovered what they carried. What I carry is a curse. The silver light sparked around her hands again, responding to her emotional turmoil. Every record, every story, we're destroyers. We're the reason the old bloodlines were wiped out. No, his voice carried absolute authority. You're the reason they were feared. She looked up at him, confusion and hope warring in her chest. What's the difference? The difference, he said, reaching out to cup her face with surprising gentleness, is that fear tells only half the story. Yes, the silver flame is powerful enough to level mountains, but it's also the only force capable of healing what others cannot. It can purify corruption, restore dead lands, bring light to places that have forgotten the sun. His thumb brushed across her cheek, and she realized she was crying, not the desperate tears of earlier, but something deeper, something that felt like relief. The council records speak of destruction because that's all they were allowed to remember. The Church of Luna saw to that during the Purge, ensuring that only the fearsome stories survived. But I remember the truth, Seraphina. I remember silver wolves who were queens, who were healers, who were the guardians of our kind's most sacred mysteries. Then why? She stopped, something shifting in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with his touch and everything to do with the way he spoke her name like a prayer. Why do I know so much about your bloodline? His smile was sad now, tinged with loss, because once upon a time, silver wolves stood beside Lycan kings as equals, as partners, as... He didn't finish, but she felt the word hanging in the air between them like a promise. Mates. And for the first time since the silver flame had awakened, she didn't feel like a monster. She felt like she might be coming home. Chapter 4. Darius led her deeper into the heart of the Forbidden Woods, where the trees grew so ancient and massive that their canopy blocked out the stars. Here, the air itself felt different, thicker, charged with power that made her silver flame dance restlessly beneath her skin. It was like walking through liquid magic. Where are we going? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Something about this place demanded reverence, as if they were entering a cathedral built by gods instead of men. To a place that's been waiting for you longer than you can imagine, Darius replied, his golden eyes reflecting an inner light in the darkness, the Moonheart Sanctum. The first shrine built by our kind when silver wolves and Lycan kings ruled together under the ancient covenant. The trees began to thin, revealing a clearing that stole the breath from her lungs. At its center stood a circle of standing stones, each one carved with symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the moonlight. But it wasn't the stones that made her heart race. It was the way they pulsed with the same silver light that lived in her veins. It's beautiful, she breathed, then gasped as her power surged in response to the sacred space. The silver flame didn't feel wild here, didn't feel dangerous. It felt welcomed. The stones recognize you, Darius said, wonder creeping into his voice. I hoped they would, but to see it, he trailed off, watching as threads of silver light began to weave between the ancient monoliths, connecting them in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Seraphina moved forward as if in a dream, her bare feet finding a path of smooth white stones that led to the circle's heart. With each step, the carvings on the monoliths grew brighter, and she began to understand that they weren't just decorative. They were a language, a story written in light and stone. What did they say? She whispered. Darius followed close behind, his presence a warm anchor in the storm of power swirling around them. They tell of the first pact, he said, his voice taking on the cadence of ancient ritual. When the moon was young and wolves first learned to walk as men, the goddess Luna blessed two bloodlines above all others, the Lycan kings born to protect and lead, and the silver wolves born to heal and purify. The stones pulsed brighter, and suddenly Seraphina could see it, not just understand, but actually see the story unfolding in the silver light. Figures made of moonbeams and starfire, ancient wolves with crowns of light, a love story written in the very fabric of creation. Together they brought peace to the wolf nations, Darius continued, his voice thick with emotion. The kings provided strength and leadership, while the silver wolves ensured the land remained pure, that the darkness could never fully take root. His voice broke slightly, they were perfect together, complementary halves of a greater whole. In the center of the circle, an altar rose from the earth, not built but grown, as if the stone itself had yearned skyward toward the moon. And there, carved into its surface, was a prophecy that made Seraphina's knees buckle. When silver flame burns brightest in the hour of greatest darkness, when the last daughter of Luna's chosen stands alone against the void, the true king shall rise from shadow and ash, and together they shall forge the crown of ages, or watch the world burn in eternal night. The last daughter, she whispered, her hand reaching out to trace the ancient words. The moment her fingers touched the stone, visions exploded through her mind, flashes of a great war, shadows that devoured light itself, packs falling one by one to a corruption that turned wolf against wolf. And through it all, a figure in the darkness, waiting, watching, growing stronger. There's something coming, she gasps, pulling her hand back from the altar. Something terrible. I can see it, feel it, a darkness that wants to consume everything. Darius's face had gone pale. The Shadow Court. We thought they were myths, legends told to frighten children. But if the prophecy is awakening now, if you're here, he ran a hand through his dark hair, looking suddenly exhausted. Then they're real, and they're closer than we feared. I don't understand. The silver flame was blazing around her now, responding to her fear and confusion. What does this have to do with me? I'm nobody. I'm a rejected pack wolf who can't control her power. No. His voice rang with absolute certainty as he moved to stand beside her at the altar. You're the silver wolf the prophecy speaks of, the last of your direct bloodline. He paused, his golden eyes meeting hers with an intensity that stole her breath. I am the true king spoken of in the ancient words, the last pure blood Lycan royal. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. You're saying we're fated mates, the ones prophesied to either save our world or watch it burn. He reached for her hand, and when their fingers intertwined, the entire circle erupted in silver and gold light. The stones sang with harmonies that predated human memory, and for a moment, Seraphina felt the weight of destiny settling around her shoulders like a mantle. But with the power came the fear. She could feel it now, that creeping darkness the prophecy warned of. It was real, and it was hunting. Hunting for her, for him, for the power they might wield together. What if I'm not strong enough? She whispered. What if I fail? Darius's grip on her hand tightened. Then we fail together. But Seraphina, he turned to face her fully, and in his eyes she saw not just desire, but absolute faith. I don't think you understand what you are yet. What we could be together. The stones don't lie, and they're singing your name like a prayer. Around them, the Moonheart Sanctum pulsed with ancient power, and somewhere in the distance, something howled, not with the voice of a wolf, but with the sound of darkness itself awakening. The prophecy had begun, and there was no turning back. Chapter 5. The howl that split the night wasn't alone. As the last echoes of the Moonheart Sanctum's ancient song faded, the forest erupted with sounds that made Seraphina's blood turn to ice. Not the hunting calls of her former pack. These were different, deeper, hungrier, the kind of sounds that nightmares were made of. Shadow wolves, Darius breathed, his body shifting into a protective stance between her and the tree line. They found us faster than I expected. Shadow wolves? Seraphina's silver flame flared around her hands, responding to the threat she could feel pressing in from all sides. I thought you said the Shadow Court was myth. I was wrong. His golden eyes had gone hard, ancient and dangerous, and they're not the only ones who've come calling. As if summoned by his words, figures began emerging from between the trees. Her heart sank as she recognized the lead wolf, Alpha Marcus, flanked by Jerome and a dozen of the Silver Moon Pack's finest warriors. But they weren't alone. Other alphas had joined them, wolves from neighboring territories she recognized from the annual gatherings, a coalition united by fear. And behind them all, moving like liquid darkness, came creatures that barely resembled wolves anymore. Their eyes burned with purple fire, and where they stepped, the forest floor withered and died. Well, Alpha Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the sacred clearing. The abomination has found herself a protector, his gaze fixed on Darius with open hostility. Though I wonder if the legendary Lycan king knows exactly what kind of monster he's sheltering. Choose your next words very carefully, Marcus Silvermoon. Darius replied, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made mountains bow. You stand on sacred ground, threatening one under my protection. Alpha Blackthorn of the Northern Territories stepped forward, his scarred face twisted with disgust. Your protection means nothing here, Mythwalker. The girl is a danger to every pack, every territory. The Council of Alphas has voted. She dies tonight, and anyone who stands with her dies alongside her. The silver flame blazed brighter around Seraphina's hands, but instead of feeling empowered, she felt sick. This was her fault. Her presence had brought war to this sacred place, had turned pack against king, had awakened things better left sleeping. You don't understand, she said, stepping out from behind Darius despite his growled warning. The prophecy, there's something worse coming. The Shadow Wolves, they're just the beginning. Prophecy? Alpha Redheart of the Eastern Pack spat. You mean the fairy tale carved into those rocks? Child, those stones have been here for centuries. Every desperate wolf with power they can't control has stood where you stand, believing they were special, believing they were chosen. Her eyes glittered with cold amusement. How many villages burned because silver wolves thought they were saviors instead of destroyers? The words hit like physical blows. Seraphina looked around the circle of hostile faces, at wolves she'd known her entire life, now looking at her with fear and hatred, and felt something break inside her chest. Maybe you're right, she whispered. Maybe I am just another deluded monster. Seraphina, no. Darius reached for her, but she stepped away. Look around you, she said, her voice growing stronger even as her heart shattered. I've been free of my pack for 3 days, and already I've brought war to your doorstep. Already I've awakened things that should have stayed buried. The silver flame began to dim around her hands. Maybe the council is right. Maybe the world would be safer without me. The Shadow Wolves chose that moment to attack. They moved like liquid nightmare, faster than natural wolves, their purple fire eyes leaving trails of light in the darkness. The assembled alphas turned to face them, but their claws and fangs seemed to pass right through the creature's smoky forms. Iron Darius roared, silver flames erupting from his own hands, not the pure silver of Seraphina's power, but something darker edged with gold. Only iron and blessed silver can touch them. But the packs had brought neither. They'd come prepared for a rogue wolf, not creatures of shadow and nightmare. Alpha Marcus went down first, shadow claws raking across his chest and leaving wounds that bled darkness. Jerome tried to help him, but a shadow wolf was already on him, its burning eyes boring into his soul. Choose. Alpha Blackthorn screamed at Seraphina as he barely avoided a shadow wolf's snapping jaws. Help us or let us all die, but choose now. The silver flame roared back to life around her hands, brighter than it had ever been. She looked at Darius, at the alphas who'd come to kill her, at the shadow wolves that would destroy them all indiscriminately. I choose to be what I am, she said, and stepped into the center of the battle. Silver fire erupted from her in waves, and where it touched the shadow wolves, they shrieked and dissolved like smoke in sunlight. But the effort was enormous, and she could feel herself burning from the inside out. Fall back to the stones! Darius commanded, fighting his way to her side. The sacred circle will amplify your power. But as they retreated toward the altar, more shadow wolves poured from the forest. Dozens of them, hundreds, as if the very darkness was taking shape and hunting form. And from somewhere in that writhing mass of shadow, a voice spoke, ancient, terrible, amused. Did you really think it would be so easy, little silver wolf? Did you think prophecy was a shield instead of a target? Alpha Marcus, bleeding from wounds that wouldn't heal, looked up at her with something that might have been understanding. Seraphina, I was wrong about what you are, but I wasn't wrong about what's coming. He collapsed, and the shadow wolves pressed closer, their purple eyes fixed on her with hungry intent. The world had chosen its side, and it wanted her dead. But as Darius moved to stand beside her, his power joining with hers in spirals of silver and gold, she realized something that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She didn't want to die. She wanted to fight. Chapter 6. The ancient caves beneath the Moonheart Sanctum felt like a wound in the earth, deep, hidden, carved from living stone by powers older than memory. Darius had brought her here after the battle, after her silver flame had finally driven back the shadow wolves and the surviving alphas had fled into the night. The sacred space above was stained with shadow blood that would not wash clean, and something fundamental had changed in the air itself. But here, in the cathedral quiet of the underground chambers, Seraphina felt like she could finally breathe. Let me see, Darius said softly, kneeling beside where she sat on a smooth stone ledge. Crystalline formations in the cave walls caught the light of the small fire he'd built, painting everything in warm amber and gold. She looked down at her hands, hands that had held enough power to dissolve nightmares, but were now torn and bleeding from channeling forces beyond her control. The silver flame flickered weakly around her fingertips, exhausted. I'm fine, she lied, then hissed as he gently turned her palms upward. You're not fine. His voice was rougher than usual, and when she looked up, she saw something raw in his golden eyes. You nearly burned yourself out up there. If you'd pushed any harder, people would have died. She met his gaze steadily, including you. He was quiet for a long moment, his thumbs tracing careful circles around the worst of the burns on her palms. His touch was impossibly gentle for someone with such power, such presence. You could have let them die. The Alphas came there to kill you, Seraphina. No one would have blamed you for choosing your own survival. You would have blamed me. The words slipped out before she could stop them, but they were true, and I would have blamed myself. Something shifted in his expression, surprise maybe, or recognition. Is that what you think of me, that I'm so cold? I think she said carefully that you're used to making hard choices, the kind that keep kingdoms alive but cost pieces of your soul. She studied his face in the firelight, seeing past the commanding presence to the shadows underneath. I think you've been alone for a very long time. His hands stilled on hers, and you think you know what that feels like. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. I know what it feels like to be feared by the people you die to protect. I know what it feels like to carry power that isolates you from everyone you care about. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I know what it feels like to wonder if you're saving the world or destroying it. Darius was quiet for a long time, his gaze dropping to their joined hands. When he spoke, his voice carried centuries of loneliness. I built my kingdom in the shadows because I knew what happened to Lycan kings who ruled in the light. They were hunted down one by one until only legends remained. I told myself it was strategy, that I was protecting what was left of the old bloodlines by staying hidden. But, she prompted gently, but the truth is, I was afraid. The admission seemed to cost him. Afraid that if I tried to reclaim what was lost, I'd fail. That I'd watch the last of our kind die because I wasn't strong enough, wasn't worthy enough to lead them back to the light. She understood. God, she understood completely, and now you're stuck with a broken silver wolf who brings chaos everywhere she goes. Now I'm blessed with a silver wolf who chose to save enemies who wanted her dead. His eyes lifted to hers, and the intensity there made her breath catch. Do you know what you did up there, Seraphina, when you stepped into that battle? She shook her head, suddenly feeling very young and very lost. You showed them what silver wolves truly were. Not destroyers, but protectors. Not monsters, but guardians willing to sacrifice themselves for others. His voice grew softer, more wondering. You reminded me why the prophecy exists, why Luna blessed your bloodline in the first place. Heat rose in her cheeks, and she tried to pull her hands away, but he held them gently. I was terrified the entire time. I had no idea what I was doing. Neither did I the first time I faced shadow wolves. His mouth curved in a slight smile. I was barely older than you are now, trying to protect a village that had just learned what I was. They'd been so afraid, but when the shadows came, he shook his head. Fear has a way of showing you what really matters. What happened? I saved them, and they still banished me the next morning. The old pain was there in his voice, but something else too. Acceptance, maybe even peace. But I learned something important that night. Being a true king isn't about being wanted. It's about doing what's right, even when no one thanks you for it. The fire crackled between them, and Seraphina found herself really looking at him, not at the Lycan king, the legend, the myth, but at Darius, at the man who'd spent centuries protecting people from the shadows, never asking for recognition or gratitude. I see you, she said suddenly, the words coming from some deep, honest place she'd been afraid to acknowledge. Not what you are, not what the prophecy says you should be. I see you, Darius, the man who builds fires to keep me warm, who tends my wounds even though he has his own. The man who's been carrying the weight of the world alone because he thinks that's what strength looks like. His breath caught, and for a moment he looked stunned, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with being truly seen. Seraphina, he said, her name a prayer on his lips. They were leaning toward each other now, the space between them charged with something deeper than magic, more profound than prophecy. His hand came up to cup her cheek, and she felt herself falling into those golden eyes, into the promise of understanding she'd never thought she'd find. Can I trust you? She whispered against his lips, close enough to feel his breath. With your life, he replied. With your heart, with everything you are. And as the firelight danced around them, Seraphina realized she believed him. Chapter 7. They never had the chance to kiss. The sound of footsteps echoing through the cave system shattered the moment like glass, and Darius was on his feet instantly, golden eyes blazing with protective fury. But the voice that called out from the tunnels made Seraphina's blood turn to ice. Seraphina? Child, are you down there? Elder Sophia, the ancient wolf, who'd sat at Marcus's right hand during her trial, who'd spoken of historical records and necessary sacrifices, the grandmother figure who'd taught her to braid flowers when she was small, who'd sung lullabies when nightmares kept her awake. It's okay, Seraphina whispered to Darius, though something cold was settling in her stomach. She was like family. But when Elder Sophia emerged from the shadows, she wasn't alone. Behind her came a figure that made Seraphina's heart stop, tall, pale, with eyes like chips of winter sky, beautiful in the way that predators were beautiful, all sharp edges and dangerous grace. Seraphina Nightshade, the stranger said, her voice like silk over steel. How lovely to finally meet the last silver wolf face to face. Darius moved instantly, placing himself between Seraphina and the newcomers. Sophia, you old fool, do you have any idea what you've brought into this sacred place? Elder Sophia's weathered face crumpled with what looked like genuine regret. I'm sorry, child. Truly. But she has Marcus. She has Jerome. She has the survivors from the battle, and she'll kill them all unless you deliver me, Seraphina finished, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. That's what this is. You're trading me. The pale woman laughed, and the sound was like breaking crystal. Oh, this is so much more than a simple trade, little wolf. Allow me to introduce myself properly. I am Morgana Ashworth, High Priestess of the Shadow Court, and I've been waiting centuries to meet you. The temperature in the cave dropped 20 degrees, and shadow wolves began seeping from the stone walls like living smoke. Darius's power flared, silver gold flames wreathing his hands, but Morgana merely smiled. I wouldn't if I were you, your majesty. You see, I've learned quite a lot about silver wolf magic in my years of study. Did you know that their power can be redirected, controlled, used by someone who understands the proper techniques? She gestured, and Elder Sophia stepped forward with tears streaming down her face. In her gnarled hands was an object that made Seraphina's knees buckle, a collar of twisted silver and obsidian, covered in runes that hurt to look at directly. The binding of Luna's daughter, Morgana said conversationally, forged during the Great Purge specifically to control silver wolves. Once it's around your lovely neck, Every spark of your power becomes mine to command. Seraphina whispered, backing away. You can't. You know me. You helped raise me. I know what you are, Elder Sophia said, her voice breaking. I know what your power could become in the wrong hands, but I also know what she'll do to the pack if I refuse. At least this way, some of them might survive. Some of them? Darius's voice was deadly quiet. Sophia, do you understand who you're dealing with? Do you know what the Shadow Court has done to every territory they've touched? Morgana's smile widened, showing teeth too sharp to be human. Oh, but that's the beautiful part. Once I have our silver wolf properly collared, I won't need to destroy the packs. I'll be able to corrupt them instead. Turn them into shadow wolves, but with their consciousness intact. They'll know exactly what they've become, but they'll be unable to resist. The cave filled with Seraphina's horrified gasp. You're talking about torture, about turning people into prisoners in their own bodies. I'm talking about efficiency, Morgana corrected. Why waste perfectly good wolves when I can remake them in my image? And with your power feeding my magic, she sighed in anticipation. I'll be able to corrupt entire territories in a matter of days instead of decades. Elder Sophia was sobbing now, but she kept walking forward with that terrible collar. I'm sorry, child. I'm so sorry. But it's them or you, and you're just one person against thousands. One person? Seraphina's power flared, silver fire racing up her arms. I'm the prophesied silver wolf. I'm supposed to save the world. Not damn it. Oh, my dear girl, Morgana laughed. Did you really think prophecies couldn't be twisted? Did you think destiny was a shield instead of a weapon? Her eyes glittered with malicious amusement. You are going to save the world. You're going to save it for me. Darius stepped forward, power blazing around him like a second skin. Over my dead body. If you insist, Morgana said and gestured to her shadow wolves, though I'd prefer you alive. A Lycan king and a silver wolf, both properly collared. The poetry of it appeals to me. The shadow wolves surged forward, but these were different from the ones they'd faced before. Stronger, more solid. And when Darius's flames hit them, they barely flinched. You see, Morgana called over the sounds of battle. I've been feeding them silver wolf magic for weeks now. Little bits I harvested from the sites where your power manifested. They're quite resistant to both silver and gold flames at this point. Seraphina watched in horror as Darius was overwhelmed, as shadow claws raked across his chest and brought him to his knees. Elder Sophia was almost close enough to reach her now, collar gleaming with malevolent purpose. Stop, Seraphina said, her voice cutting through the chaos. Stop hurting him, and I'll come willingly. Seraphina, no, Darius gasped, golden blood streaming from his wounds. But she was already walking forward, hands raised in surrender, because what choice did she have? Let Darius die? Let her former packmates be tortured into living nightmares? Watch the world burn because she was too selfish to sacrifice herself? That's my good girl, Morgana purred as Elder Sophia's shaking hands lifted the collar towards Seraphina's neck. Don't worry, this will only hurt for eternity. The cold metal touched her throat, and Seraphina closed her eyes, feeling destiny twist into something monstrous. She'd thought the prophecy meant she was the hero of this story. She'd never considered that she might be the weapon instead. Chapter 8. The collar never touched her skin. At the last second, as Elder Sophia's trembling hands brought the cursed metal to Seraphina's throat, something inside her snapped. Not broke, transformed. Like a star going supernova, like winter giving way to the first breath of spring, like every prayer her ancestors had ever whispered to the moon suddenly being answered at once. No, she said, and her voice carried harmonics that made the cave walls sing. I am not your sacrifice. Silver fire erupted from her in a wave that sent everyone staggering backward. But this wasn't the wild, uncontrolled power she'd struggled with for days. This was focused, deliberate, and utterly devastating. The collar in Sophia's hands turned to ash, and the shadow wolves shrieked as pure light ate through their corrupted forms like acid through paper. Impossible, Morgana snarled, her beautiful face twisting with rage and disbelief. The prophecy, you're meant to be the weapon, not the wielder. Seraphina rose from where she'd been kneeling, and her feet didn't touch the ground. Silver flames wreathed her like wings, like armor, like the crown she was finally beginning to understand she'd been born to wear. "You read the prophecy wrong," she said, her voice echoing with the power of ages. "I'm not Luna's weapon, I'm Luna's daughter." The truth of it blazed through her like lightning. She wasn't just a silver wolf, she was the silver wolf. The direct descendant of Luna's first chosen, carrying not just the power, but the divine mandate to protect what was sacred, to purify what was corrupt, to stand against the darkness no matter the cost. The last daughter, she whispered, understanding flooding through her like revelation. Not the last of a bloodline, the last divine heir. Morgana's eyes widened with something that might have been fear. "You're a godling. I'm exactly what you should have been afraid of." Seraphina's power pulsed outward, and where it touched the cave walls, silver veins spread like living lightning. The ancient stones remembered their purpose, remembered when gods walked among wolves and the world was young. "You wanted to use my power? Let me show you what it really looks like." She gestured, and silver fire raced along the ground toward Darius, but instead of burning him, it healed. The shadow wounds closed, the corrupted blood burned away, and he rose to his feet with gold flames blazing in his eyes. Not just power, but recognition, understanding. "My queen," he said, and she felt the words resonate in her bones. Not his mate, not his partner, his queen. The missing half of the ancient covenant, awakened at last. "Together," she said, extending her hand to him. When their fingers touched, the entire cave system exploded with light. Silver and gold flames spiraled around each other, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly, that spoke in languages older than words. The shadow wolves didn't just die, they were unmade, their very essence purified back into the natural magic they'd once been. Morgana raised her hands, dark power crackling between her fingers. "I won't let you." "You won't let me?" Seraphina's laugh was like silver bells in winter storms. "You poor, deluded creature. You think you have a choice in this?" The silver fire reached out not to destroy, but to reveal. Where it touched Morgana, her beautiful facade began to crack, showing the rot underneath. She wasn't just corrupt, she was hollow, a vessel that had traded away everything human about herself in pursuit of power. "Look at what you've become," Seraphina said, her voice heavy with pity. "Look at what you sacrificed for your twisted dreams. Was it worth it? Was ruling a dead world worth losing your soul?" For a moment, just a moment, something almost human flickered in Morgana's winter blue eyes. "I didn't have a choice. The Shadow Court, they showed me what was coming. The wars, the chaos, the ending of everything. I thought if I could control it, guide it." "You thought fear justified atrocity." Darius's voice was granite and gold fire. "You thought survival justified slavery. And you were wrong," Seraphina finished. Her power reached deeper, not burning, but cleansing, showing Morgana glimpses of what she could have been, what she could still choose to become. "It's not too late. The corruption can be burned away, your humanity restored. You can choose redemption." But Morgana's face hardened, the moment of vulnerability vanishing. "I choose power." She raised her hands for a final strike, dark magic coiling around her like living shadow, and Elder Sophia stepped between them. "Enough," the old wolf said, her voice steady, despite the tears streaming down her face. "I've seen enough death, enough corruption, enough fear ruling our choices." She looked back at Seraphina, and her weathered face was full of the love she'd always carried. "I'm sorry, child. I forgot what you really were. I let my fear make me weak." "Sophia, move," Seraphina commanded, but it was too late. Morgana's strike hit the elder full force, and she crumpled like paper. But as she fell, her sacrifice bought them the opening they needed. Silver and gold fire joined in a spiral that pierced the darkness, that struck Morgana with the combined power of divine bloodlines. She didn't scream. She simply, unmade, unraveled back into component shadows that fled shrieking into the depths of the earth, carrying her essence, but not her form, not her power, not her ability to corrupt others. The cave fell silent, except for the soft crackling of dying flames and Elder Sophia's labored breathing. Seraphina knelt beside the old wolf, silver fire dancing around her hands, as she tried to heal what couldn't be healed. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't fast enough." "Don't apologize for being magnificent," Sophia whispered, her eyes already growing distant. I see you now, truly see you. Luna's daughter come at last to set things right. She smiled, peaceful despite the pain. Tell the Pax what you really are. Not a monster to fear, but a queen to follow. She closed her eyes and went still, and Seraphina felt something break and rebuild itself stronger in her chest. Rising to her feet, power blazing around her like a silver crown, she looked toward the cave entrance, where more enemies were surely gathering. Let them come, she said, her voice carrying the authority of ages. I am Seraphina Nightshade, daughter of Luna, heir to the silver flame, and I will not be caged, controlled, or conquered. The war for the soul of the wolf nations had begun. And this time she would not be the sacrifice. She would be the savior. Chapter 9. The silence that followed Elder Sophia's death was not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that comes before earthquakes, before storms that reshape coastlines, before the world splits open and shows you what it's really made of underneath. Seraphina knelt beside the old wolf's still form, silver flames dancing around her fingers as she gently closed Sophia's eyes. The gesture was tender, reverent, but when she rose to her feet, there was something terrible and beautiful in her face. The kind of expression that made mortals remember why their ancestors had worshipped forces of nature. She died believing in redemption, Seraphina said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the cave walls hum with resonant power. She died choosing love over fear, sacrifice over survival. Her silver eyes lifted to meet Darius's golden gaze. She died believing that I could be more than what the world tried to make me. But the question hanging in the crystalline air between them was heavier than destiny, more crushing than prophecy, because they both knew what came next. They both felt the rumble of footsteps above, the gathering storm of enemies who would never stop hunting, never stop fearing, never stop trying to cage or kill what they couldn't understand. Darius moved to stand beside her, his hand finding hers, with the certainty of stars finding their constellations. Where their skin touched, silver and gold fire spiraled together, creating light that had no earthly comparison. But even joined, even powerful beyond measure, they were still just two people against a world that had spent centuries learning to fear their kind. The Council of Alphas will declare us enemies of all packs, he said quietly, his voice steady but his eyes shadowed with the weight of what they faced. They'll unite every territory against us. Human authorities will get involved. They always do when the supernatural world bleeds into theirs. And the Shadow Court, he paused, listening to something only he could hear. Morgana was just the beginning. Her destruction will call others, older things, hungrier things. Seraphina felt the truth of his words like ice in her veins. The silver flame pulsed around her hands, responding to her emotional turmoil, and she saw flashes of what was coming, armies of shadow wolves, packs turned against each other, cities burning as ancient wars spilled into the modern world, all because she had chosen to embrace what she was instead of accepting what they wanted her to be. So, what does that make us? She whispered. Heroes or villains? Saviors or destroyers? The answer to prophecy or the beginning of apocalypse? The question hung between them like a blade, because that was the terrible beauty of power, wasn't it? It didn't come with moral certainty. It didn't arrive with clear instructions or obvious enemies. It simply was, and what you chose to do with it, that was where your soul was measured. Darius turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to frame her face with infinite gentleness. In his eyes, she saw centuries of loneliness, of making impossible choices, of carrying the weight of a crown that no one else could lift. But she also saw something else, hope, faith, the kind of absolute trust that could move mountains or topple kingdoms. I know what you are, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I know what we could become together, but the choice has to be yours, Seraphina. Not the prophecies, not Luna's, not Destiny's, yours. And there it was, the moment that would define everything. She could feel the pull of ordinary life, the temptation to suppress her power, to find some quiet corner of the world where she could pretend to be normal. Part of her would always be that rejected pack wolf, that girl who just wanted to belong somewhere safe. But she was also Luna's daughter, the silver flame, the last of her bloodline and the first of something new. I choose to be what I was born to be, she said, and her voice carried the certainty of winter storms and summer lightning. I choose to stand between the darkness and the light, no matter how many enemies it makes me. I choose to be the bridge between what was and what could be. She stepped closer, her forehead touching his, their combined power washing over the cave like a benediction. I choose us. I choose this impossible, terrifying, beautiful thing we are together. Even if it means war, even if it means standing alone against the world. His smile was blinding, fierce with pride and love and something that might have been relief. Then we face it together, whatever comes. But as they stood there in the heart of the ancient cave, wrapped in silver and gold fire and the weight of destiny, a sound echoed from the tunnels above, not the howling of wolves, but something far more ominous, the measured tread of boots, many boots, human boots. The authorities, Darius breathes. Someone called them, and Seraphina felt the noose tightening around them, felt the world closing in with guns and tranquilizer darts, and containment protocols designed for things the human government preferred to keep hidden. They would be experimented on, dissected, turned into weapons for wars they'd never chosen to fight, unless they fought first. So she said, silver flames beginning to spiral around them both. I have to ask you something, and I need you to answer with your heart, not your head. She looked directly forward, as if she could see through stone and earth, to the people listening to this story, to you. Yes, you, the one who's been following her journey from the beginning, who's felt every betrayal, every loss, every moment of awakening power. Would you have chosen her? Would you have stood beside a silver wolf when the whole world called her monster? Would you have believed in love powerful enough to challenge destiny itself? Or would you have been afraid of the fire, afraid of the change, afraid of what it means to choose the impossible over the safe? The silver flames blazed brighter, and her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt like thunder. Because here's what I've learned: the world is always afraid of things it can't control. And love, real, transformative, world-changing love, is the most uncontrollable force in existence. She turned back to Darius, and together they began walking toward the surface, toward whatever army waited for them in the moonlight above. If this story has lit something inside you, if you believe in love that burns bright enough to challenge the darkness, then you need to subscribe to Clarissa Romance Collections right now. Hit that notification bell, because this tale of silver fire and impossible choices isn't over. Not by a long shot. The sound of boots grew closer, and Seraphina's smile was sharp as starlight. Because here we tell stories that burn. Stories about people who choose love over fear, power over submission, truth over comfortable lies. And if you've made it this far with us, then you already know you're ready for what comes next. But as they reached the cave entrance, as moonlight painted their faces silver and gold, she paused. The question is, she whispered, are you ready to choose a side? Chapter 10. They emerged from the cave into a night that had forgotten how to be peaceful. The Moonheart Sanctum's clearing was no longer a sacred space, it had become a battlefield. Military vehicles ringed the ancient stones, their headlights turning the mystical grove into something harsh and clinical. Soldiers in black tactical gear held weapons that hummed with electromagnetic energy, technology designed specifically for subduing supernatural threats. But it wasn't the human presence that made Seraphina's breath catch. It was the figures standing among the soldiers, wolves she recognized, alphas from packs across 3 territories, all united in their fear of what she represented. And at their head, barely recognizable with silver bindings around his wounds, stood Alpha Marcus. He looked older than she'd ever seen him, broken in ways that went deeper than physical injury. But his eyes burned with the terrible conviction of a man who believed he was saving the world. Stand down, Seraphina, he called across the clearing, his voice amplified by military equipment. This ends now. No more running, no more destruction. Surrender yourself, and we'll make sure you're treated humanely. Darius stepped up beside her, power radiating from him like heat from a forge. Humanely, he repeated the word, dripping with contempt, like the silver wolves 3 centuries ago were treated humanely, like my bloodline was handled with care when they hunted us to near extinction. Your relics, shouted Alpha Blackthorn, his scarred face twisted with disgust. Throwbacks to a time when might made right, when power meant more than wisdom. The world has moved beyond needing kings and queens. Has it? Seraphina's voice cut through the night like a blade of pure light. She walked forward, each step making the ancient stones pulse brighter, responding to her presence. Is that why you called in human soldiers? Because you've moved beyond needing power? The military commander, a hard-faced woman with colonel's insignia, raised her hand. This is Colonel Sarah Chen, Supernatural Containment Division. You are both classified as Category 5 supernatural entities. Surrender now, and you will be transported to a secure research facility where your abilities can be studied for the betterment of weapon development. Darius interrupted, his golden eyes blazing. Spare us the propaganda, Colonel. We know what your research facilities really do. But it was the figure emerging from behind the military lines that made Seraphina's heart stop. Tall, elegant, with silver hair and eyes like winter sky, familiar eyes. Hello, granddaughter. The word hit Seraphina like a physical blow. The woman walking toward them moved with the fluid grace of a predator, power radiating from her in waves that made even the soldiers step back. She was beautiful in the way that ancient things were beautiful, terrible and magnificent, and utterly inhuman. I don't have a Seraphina started, then stopped, because she could feel it now, the blood connection, the shared power, singing in recognition. You're supposed to be dead. Death, the woman said with a smile that belonged on marble statues, is a flexible concept when you carry divine blood. I am Lysandra Nightshade, last queen of the Silver Wolves. At least, I was the last until you awakened. The revelation sent shockwaves through both the military lines and the assembled alphas, because Lysandra Nightshade wasn't just legend. She was the Silver Wolf who had supposedly destroyed 3 territories before being put down during the Great Purge. The monster that justified every fear, every persecution, every hunt. Impossible Alpha Marcus breathed. She was executed. The records, Lysandra said with amusement, were written by the survivors. And I assure you, Colonel Chen, your predecessors tried very hard to kill me. They simply lacked the proper tools. She raised her hand and silver fire erupted around her, but it was wrong somehow, tainted. Beautiful but cold, powerful but empty of the warmth that had always defined Seraphina's flames. You see, granddaughter, Lysandra continued, I've spent the last 3 centuries learning what you're just beginning to understand. Power is meaningless without control. Love is weakness without purpose. And mercy, her smile turned sharp as winter wind. Mercy is what gets you killed. Seraphina felt something cold settle in her stomach. This wasn't a rescue. This wasn't family coming to save her. This was recruitment. I've been watching you, Lysandra said, moving closer despite the weapons trained on her, watching you struggle with the same lessons I learned so long ago. The Pax will never accept us. The humans will never stop fearing us. Even that lovely king of yours, her gaze flicked to Darius with amused contempt, will eventually choose his people over his heart when the cost becomes too high. You're wrong, Seraphina said, but her voice sounded hollow even to herself. Am I? Lysandra gestured to the ring of enemies surrounding them. Look around, child. Your own pack wants you dead. The military wants you caged. Even the prophecy that promised you purpose has been twisted into justification for your destruction. Her silver eyes glittered with malicious warmth. I'm offering you something better. Not redemption, revenge, not acceptance, dominance. Join me and we'll show this world what happens when they try to cage silver fire. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, not from power, but from something else, something vast moving in the deep places of the earth. The ancient stones of the Moonheart Sanctum started to crack, and through the fissures, darkness seeped like living shadow. What have you done? Darius demanded, his power flaring as he sensed the approaching threat. Lysandra's laughter was like breaking glass. I've done what was necessary. The Shadow Court wasn't my enemy, granddaughter. It was my teacher. Morgana showed me how to embrace the darkness that the light casts, how to become more than Luna ever intended. The cracks in the earth widened, and from them emerged creatures that made the shadow wolves look like children's nightmares, beings of pure darkness and corrupted silver, abominations that had once been silver wolves but had traded their humanity for power beyond measure. Choose quickly, Seraphina, Lysandra said as chaos erupted around them. Soldiers opened fire on the emerging horrors. Alphas shifted into their wolf forms, howling battle cries that were drowned out by inhuman shrieks. Stand with me and rule, or stand against me and burn with the rest of them. But as the world exploded into violence, as silver fire clashed with shadow and gold flames blazed against the darkness, Seraphina heard something else. A whisper in the wind, a voice that sounded like her mother, like Luna herself, like every silver wolf who had ever chosen light over darkness. The true test is not power, daughter. It is what you do with power when no one is watching, when no one will thank you, when choosing right means choosing hard. And in that moment, as her grandmother's corrupted silver fire reached for her, as Darius fought desperately to reach her side, as the fate of two worlds hung in the balance, Seraphina made her choice. But that choice and its consequences would have to wait, because somewhere in the darkness beyond the clearing, something ancient was stirring, something that had been sleeping since the first silver wolf lit the first flame, something that had been waiting for exactly this moment, when the bloodline would finally fracture, when light and shadow would clash in the place where it all began. The true Alpha was waking up, and when it did, every prophecy, every legend, every story told around pack fires would be revealed as nothing more than echoes of a much older, much more dangerous truth. The war for the soul of the supernatural world was just beginning, and Seraphina Nightshade, Silver Wolf, Luna's daughter, keeper of the ancient flame, was about to discover that being chosen by prophecy was nothing compared to being hunted by the gods themselves. To be continued, because this story, this impossible tale of love and power and the courage to choose light in a world that demands darkness, this is only the beginning.